Ever feel like you're constantly playing catch up?
Hmm.
Like bombarded with information, but never truly mastering anything? It's like the more we learn, the more we realize we don't know.
It's a struggle as old as time itself, and it's precisely this feeling that one of history's greatest minds, René Descartes, tackled head-on.
That's what we're diving into today.
Okay?
Descartes' Discourse on the Method. Now I know what you might be thinking. Philosophy. On a Thursday afternoon.
Right.
But trust me, this isn't just some dusty old text. Descartes laid out a framework for thinking, for questioning, for arriving at truth that's shockingly relevant to how we navigate our world. Well, today even.
It's true. Think of Discourse on the Method as Descartes' own kind of like intellectual journey. He essentially takes us by the hand and walks us through his process of dismantling years of inherited knowledge to rebuild a framework for understanding the world based on reason.
And the thing is, he wasn't some hermit in an ivory tower. Descartes was writing during a time of incredible upheaval in Europe. The scientific revolution was challenging long-held beliefs, and there was this sense that everything was up for grabs.
Imagine the feeling, the excitement, the uncertainty, the sheer volume of new information. How familiar?
Yeah.
Just like in Descartes' time, we're grappling with information overload, trying to discern truth in a world saturated with noise.
Which makes his journey even more fascinating. In the first part of Discourse on the Method, Descartes doesn't hold back. He dives straight into his dissatisfaction with traditional education. He criticizes its reliance on rote learning and dogma.
And this is where it gets interesting. Descartes didn't just complain about the problem, he took action. He decided to embark on a radical experiment, to doubt everything he thought he knew, to strip away all assumptions, and to rebuild his knowledge from the ground up.
And that's where his famous methodical doubt comes into play. Imagine questioning absolutely everything you thought was true. It sounds terrifying, right?
Yeah.
But for Descartes, it was about clearing the slate, identifying the unshakable truths that couldn't be doubted, those foundational pieces upon which all other knowledge could be built.
And here's the brilliance. Descartes recognized that we don't enter the world as blank slates. We inherit beliefs, biases, and assumptions from our families, our cultures, our societies. Methodical doubt was his way of unpacking all of that, of questioning those inherited truths to arrive at a more accurate understanding of the world.
It's like hitting the reset button on your brain, right? But instead of deleting everything, you're carefully examining each file, deciding what's worth keeping and what's outdated or just plain wrong.
It's the ultimate act of intellectual spring cleaning. And from this process of radical doubt, Descartes distilled a set of four, well, they're simple but incredibly powerful rules for navigating the world and building knowledge, rules he lays out in part 2 of Discourse on the Method.
And these aren't just like abstract philosophical principles, are they? He intended for these rules to be practical tools for, for everyday life.
Absolutely. Descartes believed that by applying these rules, we can move from a place of uncertainty and confusion to one of clarity and confident action.
Okay, so let's break them down. Rule number 1. Accept as true only what is clear and distinct, free from doubt. It sounds, deceptively simple, but what does that really mean for someone trying to apply this in their daily life?
It's about being your own gatekeeper of information. We're constantly bombarded with claims, opinions, and facts. This rule challenges us to approach everything with a healthy dose of skepticism, to demand evidence, and to be wary of blindly accepting anything at face value, no matter how convincing the source may seem.
Don't just follow the crowd. Think for yourself. I like it. What about rule number 2?
Rule number 2 is all about breaking down complex problems into smaller, more manageable parts. Descartes argues that when we're faced with a large, complicated issue, our instinct is often to shy away from it, overwhelmed by the sheer scale. He suggests breaking it down into smaller, more digestible pieces.
This resonates with me. As someone who constantly has, multiple projects on the go, I can see how this approach could be a game changer. Instead of getting bogged down by the enormity of a task, you tackle it strategically, one step at a time.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of this rule. It applies to everything from solving complex equations to making major life decisions. By dividing and conquering, you gain clarity, control, and the confidence to move forward.
Okay, on to rule number 3. This one feels particularly relevant for those of us who are, lifelong learners. Build your knowledge systematically, starting with the simplest things and gradually working towards the more complex.
This is about building a solid foundation. Think of constructing a building. You don't start with the roof, right? You start with a strong, stable foundation and build upon it layer by layer. Knowledge works the same way.
It's like when you're learning a new language. You don't jump into reading Dostoevsky on day one. You master the alphabet, then basic vocabulary, then grammar, gradually increasing the complexity as your foundation solidifies.
Precisely. By approaching learning systematically, we avoid the frustration of tackling concepts we're not prepared for and ensure that each new piece of knowledge is built upon a solid base of understanding.
And finally, rule number 4. This feels like the one we often neglect, much to our detriment.
It's the importance of review and reflection. Review your thinking regularly to make sure you haven't missed anything. Descartes knew that even the most rigorous thinkers are prone to error.
We all have blind spots, right? So how do we apply this rule effectively without getting caught in a loop of overthinking?
It's about cultivating a habit of critical self-reflection. Take the time to revisit your conclusions, to examine your assumptions, and to look for potential biases or gaps in your thinking. It's about ensuring that your understanding is as comprehensive and as accurate as possible.
It's like that final look over before before you hit send on an important email or something like that. You're just checking for any last errors or anything you might have missed, right?
Exactly. It's about catching those oversights, those little details before they become, before they snowball into something bigger.
Mm-hmm. And that's key in any field, isn't it? I mean, whether you're a scientist or an artist or just trying to make a decision in your own life, that final review, that taking that moment to step back, it can make all the difference.
Absolutely.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about Descartes' journey of radical doubt, his 4 incredibly powerful rules for navigating the world and building knowledge, but his journey doesn't end there. In part 4 of Discourse on the Method, things take a decidedly more, a more metaphysical turn. Descartes introduces his famous Cogito argument, I think, therefore I am.
It's one of the most famous, most cited philosophical arguments of all time, really.
Yeah.
And it came out of his process of methodical doubt. Having questioned everything, he arrives at this one unshakable truth. Even if everything else can be doubted, the very act of doubting proves that there's a doubter doing the doubting.
Right. It's like this lightning bolt, right? Even if we doubt absolutely everything else, we can't doubt our own existence.
Yeah. It's a powerful realization.
It really is.
And it had huge implications. It shifted the focus away from external authorities like, the church or ancient texts, and put it on the individual and their own reasoning abilities as the foundation of knowledge.
And it's like he's saying you have the power. You have the power to think for yourself. You have the power to arrive at truth through your own reasoning.
Exactly. And it's from this foundation that Descartes goes on to tackle some of the biggest philosophical questions out there, the existence of God, the nature of reality, you name it.
Yeah.
But maybe even more relevant to our conversation today is how he takes this method, this approach to knowledge, and he applies it to understanding the physical world.
Because in part 5, he really dives into the workings of the human body, right, and the nature of the universe, and proposes this radical idea. He says that the universe itself is like this giant machine.
It's governed by laws, by these principles that we can understand.
And this had a profound impact, really, on shaping what we now know as modern science.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this was a huge departure from how people thought about the world back then. Descartes, he argued that we could understand the universe, including ourselves, our bodies, in these mechanistic terms, kind of like those really intricate clocks from that era.
Yeah, automata.
Exactly. These incredibly complex machines with all the gears and springs working together. He's saying a similar principle applies to us. We're complex machines designed by, well, he would say a divine clockmaker.
So instead of saying, oh, it's magic or it's the gods or whatever, he's saying, no, there are natural explanations, mechanical explanations for how things work, and that's a radical shift.
It really is. And it really encouraged people to start investigating, to start experimenting, to not just accept things at face value, but to really dig into the how and the why. And even though some of his specific scientific ideas, they haven't exactly held up over time, that general approach, revolutionary. It was like this huge turning point for science.
It's amazing, isn't it, how these big philosophical ideas can end up having these very real, concrete impacts on the way we understand the world and the way we live in it.
It's all connected. And that's something that comes through really strongly in the last part of Discourse on the Method. Descartes, he wasn't content just to think these big thoughts. He wanted to share them. He believed that knowledge should be used to benefit humanity. That's what drove him.
Yeah, he wasn't just writing for other philosophers, was he? I mean, he actually wrote this in French, not Latin, which was like the language of scholars at the time. He wanted to reach a wider audience. He wanted people to read this.
Absolutely. He wanted to make these ideas accessible, to give people the tools to think for themselves. And, it's a message that's still so relevant today, isn't it? I mean, we're facing these huge challenges in the world, complex problems.
Climate change, social inequality, the list goes on and on.
Exactly. And Descartes reminds us that knowledge isn't just power. It's a responsibility. It's up to each of us to use our ability to reason, to question, and to never stop learning so that we can, so we can make the world a little bit better.
So as we wrap up our deep dive on Descartes, I want to leave you with this. Embrace that curiosity. Question everything. And never, ever underestimate the power of your own mind.
Well said. The power to learn, to grow, to make a difference, it's in all of us. And who knows what you might discover when you start questioning and exploring the world with a little bit of that Cartesian spirit.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.